The year was 1922, 2 years into the Roaring Twenties as they were becoming known. The 20th century, which had started with dreams of prosperity, wealth for all, and peace, had already seen those ideals die a bloody, choking death on the battlefields of France in 1914. The Great War had annihilated an entire generation of men, creating a population crisis in the years that followed, and had set the stage for the century to follow to become the most violent, bloody century in the history of the human race. The Christian ideals which had for centuries guided the people of Europe had been shattered by the brutality of the new style of warfare that the Great War had birthed upon the land. This showed itself in the shocking rise of the occult, a plethora of messiahs, each one with the self-belief in their way forward to peace and prosperity, and a cruel disregard for one's fellow man. The scars of the Great War not only affected the societies of Europe but were visible and horrifying in the disfigurement of men who had survived the trench warfare, the charges, and the gas attacks of now modern war. Not all battlefield scars were physical though, as many soldiers had returned home mentally traumatized by the war. It was possible that such a mental imbalance drove someone to commit a crime so horrendous and evil that it shocked and chilled an isolated farming community 70 kilometers north of Munich. Hinterkaifeck was a farm in the Free State of Bavaria, a landlocked German state in the country's south, which placed it almost central in Europe itself. Hinterkaifeck was a large farm, approximately 16.88 hectares, including roughly 3 hectares of dense woodland. It was owned and run by the Gruber family. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, was married to Cecilia Sanhuter. They moved to Hinterkaifeck in 1886, not long after getting married. The farming property had belonged to Cecilia since 1877, who had gained the farmland as part of her divorce from her first husband, Josef Assem. Cecilia's first marriage had produced 3 children, Martin in 1879, Cecilia in 1881, and Andreas in 1883. Through her marriage to the elder Andreas, she bore 2 more children, Victoria in 1887 and Sophie in 1889. All was not well in the Gruber household. The elder Andreas had forced an incestuous relationship with his daughter Victoria between the years 1907 and 1910. By 1914, Victoria had married a Weidhofen native called Karl Gabriel. Ownership of the Hinterkaifeck farm was transferred to the now Victoria Gabriel on the day of their wedding, March 11, 1914. Victoria's marriage was destined to be a short affair as the Great War exploded a few months later. Karl was called up to serve in the military and was killed at the First Battle of Artois, fought at and around the city of Arras on December 12, 1914. This marriage had produced a single daughter, Cecilia Gabriel, born on January 9, 1915. Later that same year, the elder Andreas's incestuous actions came back to haunt him as a district court in Nuremberg found both he and his daughter Victoria guilty of engaging in an incestuous affair. Andreas got 1 year in jail, while Victoria got a single month. By 1919, Victoria Gabriel was in a casual relationship with their neighbor Lorenz Schlittenbauer. By now, Victoria had had another child, and she admitted to her lover that this child, Josef Gruber, was the product of more intimate assault by her own father, the elder Andreas Gruber. Once more he went to trial, but due to changes in testimonies, it was determined that there was not sufficient evidence for conviction, and Andreas walked free. Lorenz Studenbauer decided to adopt Josef as his own son. A new face joined the Hinterkaifeck farm in November 1920 as a maid. 23-year-old Crescenz Reiger was sent to the farm by a local employment agency and would stay on the farm until the end of August 1921. During her time there, Crescenz began a romantic relationship with local labourer Anton Bichler. While together, Anton would often ask specific questions about the Gruber family's wealth and apparently remarked that the family ought to be dead. These words sent a chill down Crescenz's spine. Her time seemed to start well enough, but things would get quite disturbing for Crescenz. At one point of her tenure there, she began hearing heavy footsteps pacing back and forth in the attic, right above her room. Other times she could feel eyes watching her in rooms where she was supposedly alone. It gnawed at her nerves and kept her from being able to rest and relax at the Hinterkaifeck farm. Eventually she brought these concerns to the elder Andreas, now in his early 60s. The family patriarch dismissed these concerns outright. Ghosts at the Hinterkaifeck? Rubbish. Stupid female superstition. That's all that is. Andreas the elder would rave. Patrolling the grounds was an aggressive farm dog who would bark fiercely at any and all outsiders. Crescenz noted, though, that the dog would never bark at Anton. He was there so often. It was the middle of the night, and Crescenz was fast asleep in her bed. A tapping on the window roused her, and her first thought was that Anton had come to her, as he often tapped at her window to visit. She smiled through her sleepiness until the figure spoke. She woke up instantly and her blood ran cold. The voice was not Anton's. The stranger pressed her for information regarding the household's sleeping arrangements. Specifically, was Victoria sleeping with her father Andreas that night? Finally, on the last day of August 1921, Crescenz fled the Hinterkaifeck farm, swearing the farm to be haunted. Though Crescenz had fled the farm, the strange occurrences would continue around the farm over the next 6 months. During that time, they desperately tried to find a new maid to help with the housework and caring for the children. One morning, the elder Andreas walked into the kitchen. His gaze fell upon the table where something caught his eye. A newspaper lay there, open and half-read. Andreas looked at it. His brow furrowed as he racked his mind. Something about this paper looked off. He stepped forward and closed the newspaper, turning to its front page. He recoiled at once. This was a newspaper from Munich. No one in the household read any newspapers from Munich. Andreas eased himself down in a chair and thought about this. Was this his? Slowly he shook his head. He had no memory of buying this newspaper. There were letters on the table addressed to the farm, and Andreas assumed that the newspaper must have been left by accident by the postman. Later, Andreas would be outside and spoke with some of his neighbours. He mentioned the Munich newspaper and queried if perhaps the postman had misdelivered one of their papers. Their response raised a disquiet in his heart. No one in their area read any newspapers from Munich. Andreas thought back to their maid, Crescenz Rieger's abrupt departure, and her declarations of the of the farmstead being haunted. Was she right after all, he thought to himself. There would be numerous unfamiliar newspapers found throughout the homestead in the months that followed. Andreas also noted that their keys kept disappearing. 1921 turned into 1922, and on the Hinterkaifeck farm the weather slowly began to turn. The wind blew colder and harsher. Rains increased as the first days of the new year turned into months. By March, the first drifts of snow began to fall, and with it the temperature plunged even further. Light snow soon became heavier, and the sun seemingly withdrew from this central area of Europe. Snow rose blanketing the land. By the end of March, the hectares of land that was the Hinterkaifeck farm were completely covered in many inches of snow. One of these days, the elder Andreas had left the main homestead and was walking towards the barn. The snow crunched beneath his feet as he went. The barn was a large structure connected to the main housestead at a 90-degree angle. The whole building formed an L shape when viewed from above. Andreas was going about his daily business around the farm when he walked around to the end of the barn. He drew near with his eyes turned towards the ground. There before him was a line of footsteps sunken into the deep snow. Andreas followed the footprints. They came from the nearby woodlands and went straight into the barn. There was only one set of footprints, however, and they did not leave the barn. Once more, the concerns of their former maid came to mind. He would mention these strange tracks to his neighbours. He did not, however, inform the police. During all this time, for the 6 months plus that the strange events had been noted by various members of the household, the dog, the aggressive dog that always barked at outsiders, had been quiet and still. The monster who was haunting the Hinterkaifeck farm had become so familiar to the property's canine resident. Awe was so terrifying, even to the aggressive dog, that he silenced the dog's attitude through fear and terror. On the afternoon of Friday, March 31st, Maria Baumgartner arrived as the family's newest maid. Escorting Maria was her own sister. Her sister could only stay for a short while. She left Hinterkaifeck a few hours later, after meeting everyone in the household. She would be the last person to ever see the Gruber family alive. Later that day, the sun began to set on the Hinterkaifeck farm. For months now, a monster, Kresen's ghost, had lurked and hidden on the property. Now, as the sun was setting on the farm, did he look out from his hiding spot and stare into the darkening sky? Was there an astronomical sign spoken to him? Or was this monster in league with demons or commanded by voices only he could hear? Whatever drove this monster of a human being changed that evening as the sun dipped below the horizon. A decision had been made. The night of horror would begin in just a few hours' time. Evening turned to night, and the Gruber family settled in for their tea, their evening dinner. Afterwards, the children were put to bed, and the new maid Maria went to bed also, as the long travel to the farm had left her exhausted. The elder Andreas and his wife Cecilia Gruber were next to retire for the night, leaving only Victoria Gabrielle. Did she spend her nightly hours reading or writing? Perhaps she merely sat beside a fireplace and stared out a window, enjoying the winter night. Either way, at some point, a noise drew her attention. It came from the barn. She looked up and frowned. Everyone else had retired to their rooms for the night. Only the cows and horses should have been in the barn. Not liking to leave anything to chance, Victoria decided to check out the barn herself. Victoria walked down the length of the house, reaching the connecting corridor that led directly to the connected barn. She stepped down onto the strewn, greasy barn floor and looked around. The barn was quiet, with tiny shafts of moonlight peeking through tiny cracks in the upper level shutters. Suddenly there was a noise to one side, very close to her. She turned, frowning, and then the monster struck. A figure lurched from the shadows. Something swung with a wet, sodden thwack. Victoria froze on the spot. She trembled and shook as her nerves twitched and jerked. Her eyes were glazed, and blood was streaming down the blade of the matlock that was now buried in her head. The monster grunted, tugged, and tore the matlock free as Victoria's body lost all control and finally collapsed into a dead heap. The monster heaved and dragged Victoria's corpse to the corner of the barn near the doorway. Andreas slept in his bed next to his wife. All was peaceful until the groaning cow of the cries jerked him awake. He grunted and muttered beneath his breath as he woke up and slowly rose in his bed. He listened. Yes, it was the cows in the barn. They were making a ruckus over something. Beside him, his wife Kazilla had also woken up. What is it?" she asked. Andreas, tired and grumpy, did not answer verbally. He waved a hand at her, pulled on a dusty old dressing gown, and made his way to the corridor that led out to the barn. His footsteps were heavy and ponderous, his brow set low and unimpressed with this late-night disruption to his sleep. He thrust open the door, stepped into the barn, and the bloody matlock flashed before his eyes. The blade struck deep into his skull and killed him instantly. He shook on the spot. Blood flowed down in several long trails until the matlock was torn out of his collapsing body. Then the blood flowed like a river. The monster kicked Andreas the Elder over into a heap onto the top of his daughter Victoria, a position he had always enjoyed in life, now claimed by happenstance, death. Kazilia stood in the doorway of her bedroom, straining to hear her husband. She wanted to call out to him, but then thought of the children. She dared not wake them, and so, slowly, she inched her way through the house towards the corridor that led out to the barn. Her shuffling feet took her past the children's room, where, unbeknownst to her, 7-year-old Kazilia Gabrielle, Victoria's daughter, had been awakened by the noise of the cows from the barn. Little Kazilia crept from her bed to the door and opened it a peek. She spied her grandmother and namesake, Kazilia Gruber, walking towards the barn at the end of the corridor. Her eyes were glued to the crack she had made by opening the door just slightly. She was thankful it had not squeaked and alerted her grandmother. Kazilia Gruber reached to the doorway of the barn and peered inside. Thwack! The bloodied matlock drove its pick, now dripping with blood, bone and brain matter, directly through the top of Kazilia's head, killing her instantly, like the others. The monster grunted as he tore his weapon free, shoved the collapsing corpse into the growing heap where her husband and daughter lay. The monster paused for a moment, drawing his breath and savouring the thrill of the kill. Then his ears twitched. There was the pitter-patter of smaller feet, much smaller feet running down the corridor towards the barn. He frowned as a soft voice called out into the darkness. "Oma? Oma?" The voice of Kazilia Gabrielle cried out. The little girl was right there. She ran into the barn and looked around. The monster looked down and grunted. Kazilia looked up and saw only darkness as the bloody matlock swung once more. She was struck in the head and sent flying through the air. She landed in the hay, bleeding from a savage blow to the head. But she did not die instantly. She lay trembling and silent from shock and terror. The monster paid her no more mind. He lit a kerosene lamp and turned his back on them all and walked into the house, closing the door behind him. But his work was not yet done. The monster moved down the corridor, holding his matlock ready, blood and brains dripping upon the floor. His lamp cast back the darkness of the house. He paused at the maid's room and gently pushed the door open. There was only one bed in the room, where Maria the maid was sleeping. He set the lamp down outside the door, stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind him. He let his eyes adjust to the darkness and then moved into position, towering above the bed of the new maid. Then he struck. Maria died in an instant, not even feeling the blow that killed her. The next room down was the children's room, where little Joseph lay in his crib. In moments, he died as swiftly as the rest of his family. Moonlight poured in through the bedroom window, illuminating the monster who stood in the middle of the room, clothing slashed with blood and brains, and the odd bone fragment. In the moonlight, the deep red blood appeared quite black, deep black as his own dead soul. If you enjoyed this content, then please like, subscribe and share. It would help us immensely. Would you like to see these videos early, before everyone else, or enjoy exclusive content? Then join Legio Centurion Films on Patreon. The greater the support, the more often we can create video content for you. Check out our other YouTube channel for all our other content released by Legio Centurion Films. There you will enjoy everything from our latest short films to examples of showreel scenes. You can also enjoy this content on our website, www.l-cfilms.com.au.